that it was a non-traditional way of looking at the craft really appealed to me.
What do you think of the thesis of Janet Malcolm's book, The Journalist and the Murderer?
A book that is not so kind to my mentor, Joe McGinnis. Yeah, well, Janet Malcolm has a few issues of her own that aren't mentioned in that book, but she also, she makes a really, brilliant and brutal point. That there is a bit of an appropriation when we do stories, that we sort of seduce our subjects into thinking the story is about them. But it's really our version of them, which is, can lead to all kinds of, hurt feelings and misperceptions. But all the more reason why a journalist has this sort of sacred responsibility and, integrity that has to be preserved, because you have this kind of absolute control over the facts of someone's life.
What were the stories that you won Pulitzer Prizes for?
Well, I was part of a team in both cases. The first one was the LA riots, where we won the entire staff won the Pulitzer for breaking news or spot news reporting for day 2 of the riots. And my role in that was modest at best. I was just part of a big team. 2 years later, we won the same Pulitzer for the Northridge earthquake, and I played a bigger role in that. I was one of the first people in the newsroom. I got there about 5 a.m. while the power was still off, and there were green glow sticks illuminating things. And I actually wrote the lead story in the paper that day, even though my byline doesn't appear on it.
What was the toughest part of writing this memoir?
Well, there were sort of a 2-part answer to that. I mean, one is I had spent the previous 25 years, aiming this spotlight or microscope on other people, trying to peek behind the mask that they wear to get on the inside and, gain some understanding of what makes them tick. And to shine that light or that lens back at myself was an uncomfortable practice. I sat in front of the computer screen for close to 2 years writing this book, and that screen many times ceased to be a screen and kind of became a mirror, and it was reflecting back all these patterns and foibles that weren't always very flattering. So first of all, I had to overcome that. But there was a second thing about it that was hard, and that is, writing a memoir that is truthful or confessional, as some people have called this. The being honest part, or just letting it all out. In some ways, that's not even the hardest part, because the honesty isn't confessing your sins or bearing your soul. The really honest part and the real hard work is, what then do you make of those things? What is the meaning that you extract from that? And what I discovered was, it was one thing to put Jesse Katz in motion as a character in the book and have Jesse Katz do some, fumbling, bumbling, self-deluded things. But and that's part of the storytelling, being that character. But I'm also the narrator, and Jesse Katz, the narrator, has to be a little wiser and less diluted than Jesse Katz, the character. So I'm writing this thing, and I'm realizing, there has to be an evolution. I have to acquire some wisdom by the end of this book. I have to have some insight, some self-knowledge that perhaps I didn't have at the beginning. And in the thick of that, I'm lighting some candles, asking, wondering, praying for that insight, because I didn't start writing the book with too many answers in hand.
To whom were you praying?
To the literary gods.
Did your kids attend your athletic endeavors? Did your parents attend your athletic endeavors when you were a kid?
They played ball with me. My mom taught me how to hit. She paraded me out to the curb with a wiffle ball and a plastic bat. And my dad used to throw me pop flies and grounders in the yard and sort of narrate these fictional all-star games. So they instilled it in me. But once I actually joined a little league and had a coach and had games, I really have very little memory of them participating or even sort of cheering me on at the park. I mean, it was as if that was my thing. I had selected this. I was doing baseball, and I would figure it out, and I would do it as long as it was meaningful to me. They were engaged in a lot of other stuff, a lot of sort of personal growth and transformation of their own, and I think they just left me to my own devices.
How would you have felt as a kid if your parents had shown up to your Little League games and yelling and cheering you on?
That's a good question. I probably would have been embarrassed. I probably would have. That was just sort of the way I was raised, though. I mean, I was really independent and often kind of left alone for long stretches of time. I was, my mom groans when she hears me say this, but I was sort of a latchkey kid from the time I was, by the time I was 10 or 11, and would come home, from school, and nobody was home. I had the key, and would make myself food. And I don't know if kids did homework back then. Certainly not the way they do today. But I was kind of, I was granted this independence, and I think that, the baseball was part of it. I was allowed to do that on my own.
Are you better off or worse off for that independence?
Well, wow. I could give you 4 or 5 answers to that. My gut reaction is to say I'm better off. I think it's made me, a really sort of adventurous person, personally and professionally. I think it's given me the kind of confidence to do a lot of things that I didn't think early on I would do. It gave me the confidence to come to LA, literally knowing nobody here, and having only the flimsiest of jobs as a summer intern at the LA Times, and deciding that this was going to be my home. So in that sense, it was priceless. At the same time, that I think that independence, comes at a cost. I'm 1,000 miles from my parents, and as I see them aging, they're both in their late 70s. I feel that distance, and I know they miss having me close, and and I worry about having to make some really difficult decisions from